So this video is just an opinion piece and a bit of a ramble because I need something to fill the time while I'm in Japan for a month, and currently I'll be in either Hiroshima, Osaka or Kyoto, depending on how my schedule has worked out. So my holiday aside, the question for this video is what 35mm SLR should you buy to get started shooting film? The first thing I would ask is if you already have an interchangeable lens camera, because a lot of camera systems have both digital and film bodies that you can use, and then they can share lenses, and this makes it a good way to get into shooting film. Now, before we start, I do need to state that this only works for full frame lenses. The body can be APS-C, but the lenses must cover full frame in order to cover a 35mm film frame. So no Nikon DX or Canon EFS lenses can be shared. As for the lens, a good lens to start off with, as usual, is the cheap 50mm lens for your system, often called the Nifty 50. Canon has the 50 1.8 EF lens, and Nikon has their own 50 1.8 G AFS lens. You can find these lenses pretty cheap secondhand, and every photographer honestly should have a Nifty 50 in their kit anyway. So now we arrive at the question, what film bodies are out there for your camera system? So let's start with my chosen 35mm and digital brand, Nikon. So if you have a Nikon DSLR or a Nikon Z mirrorless camera, your best bet is a 90s Nikon Film SLR that can use the Nikon G lenses. Now the reason we chose these lenses is because they can be used on both the Nikon DSLRs and on the Z mount cameras using the FTZ adapter, which allows the lens to pull double duty. Now before I mention any particular cameras, you will need to do a bit of research on what types of f-mount lenses will work on which body. This is because in the Nikon world, you need a master's degree in optical mountology in order to understand the f-mount fully and all the oddities with it. So, for a cheap option, the Nikon F70 or the F90X is a solid choice. They can be had pretty easily for 50 to 100 euros on eBay, and these will work with the G lenses as well as the older screwdriver AF lenses as well. But the AF on these bodies can be pants. So let's step it up to a mid-level option, and that is the F100. This is a camera I've actually owned for a while, and it is a wonderful camera, but it does have that annoying issue with the back door breaking, and you have to be careful with that. You can pick up a nice F100 for 250 to 500 quid depending on condition. After that, the next choice is probably an F5, which is a solid camera, but it is a huge pro beastly tank of a camera. And you can pick one of those up in fairly decent condition for around 500 smackers. And then of course, at the top of the pops, we have the Nikon F6. They can be had for €1,000 coins, but they are an expensive choice. However, in my opinion, it's the best 35mm SLR ever made, and I absolutely love using mine. Now you might ask, what about the old mechanical winding film bodies? And if you're coming from a DSLR, I would actually avoid those bodies getting started because there's a lot of weird lens compatibility issues, and you can just run into loads of little small niggly problems. Also, the 90s film SLRs function in a very similar way, so it's a very easy way to get started. You know, an F3 is an amazing camera, but it's a little bit frustrating to get used to it after coming from a DSLR. Now for Canon cameras, the choice is much easier. Just buy an EF film body and some EF lenses. If you have a Canon DSLR, you can just share the lenses across on both systems. On the newer Canon mirrorless cameras, you can use Canon's EF to RF adapter. So now you can use your EF lenses on your mirrorless camera, and it's just super easy to share lenses. Canon's EF mount is completely electronic, so there's no issues with compatibility, there's no weirdness with autofocus. It should just work. Now I've never owned any Canon cameras, however, from what I hear, all the lenses work on pretty much all the bodies. As for the bodies themselves, on the low end, the EOS 3000N is dirt cheap and can be had for under 100 euros. In the middle, you've got your EOS 30, which might be a good place to look, and that can be had for about 150. And then on the high end, you can get an EOS 3 or an EOS 1N, and those can be had for under 300 euros. And I've seen these cameras in person and they can be really nice. However, the cream of the crop for the EF system for film shooting is the EOS 1V. but it is pricey at 500 to 1,000 euros depending on condition. Now, one thing to note is that on the older Canon FD bodies, they are not compatible in any way with the EF mount. So don't buy an AE1 and expect to share lenses. The FD mount system is 100% incompatible in every way with the EF system. Now for Sony users, not that they would ever get into film, but it's a complex situation with Sony. And what I would do is I'd try and grab a Minolta A-mount camera. Now the reason for this is that Sony actually bought Minolta quite a long time ago, and they kept the A-mount for the Sony DSLRs, or whatever you call that weird SLT mirror thing they had going on for a while. The reason I bring this up is that Sony makes a really nice A to E mount adapter called the LA-EA5 or the LA-EA4 for older E-mount cameras. So if you have a Sony mirrorless camera, you can use A-mount lenses on this from the film body. Now you do need to look up the adapters on this. I'm not hugely familiar with this, and there are some compatibility oddities depending on which adapters work on which body, so you need to pay attention there. As for the bodies themselves, the Minolta Dynax or Maxim bodies, depending on the region where they were sold, can be a solid pickup. A Maxim Alpha 7, Alpha 5 or Alpha 9 can be had pretty cheap, under 300 euros, and from what I hear, they're pretty solid cameras. But given that, I actually don't know a huge amount about the Minolta system, so do some research and make sure it's an A-mount camera and that the lens will work on both film and digital bodies. As for your digital Leica user, why are you watching this video? Just buy an M-mount film body. There are no cheap options with Leica. So what if you're in a situation where you don't have an interchangeable lens digital camera? Then the options for beginner cameras open way beyond this video's scope. But if you want a film SLR that is really nice and you have no plans at all to get a digital body in the same mount to share lenses, I would take a look at the Olympus OM system. The Olympus OM cameras and lenses can be had pretty cheap, and there are a lot of fantastic bodies and lenses in that system available. Also, the cameras are really nice and small and they handle beautifully. Another cheap choice is the older Minolta MC or MD mount cameras. They can be had for next to nothing, and the lenses for that system can be very cheap to boot. I would avoid the Canon FD cameras, however, like the AE1. Not because they're bad cameras in any way, but because they've been hyped up so much to really high prices, and also the lenses are getting really expensive. From what I hear, the cinematography crowd is rehousing a lot of these lenses, so they're getting kind of expensive. And the system is just probably not worth the price to buy into it at this point. Anyway, that's it for this quick video and all I have on this topic. I'm sure there'll be loads of comments on this video down below mentioning loads of other options, but from me, that's it for this video. See you next time.